Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, April 11th. Thanks so much for joining me. Let me get this set up a little better. Okay, so as always, the point of the critique is to give that workshop experience, which is so valuable. We do this once a week, every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Central Time, where I am right now. We give the critique of the week, and what we do is look at some poems that people have submitted for this purpose. They want to learn, they want to become better writers, which is great. We really encourage that. And if you'd like to participate, all you got to do is go to rattle.com, find in the menu bar under content, you find the critique of the week page. You submit up to 2 poems, preferably 2, because it's better to get a good look at both, and then we'll talk about them here. We'll talk about what works, what doesn't, how to improve the poem, things we can move around, any kind of poetry craft topics that come up because of it. So feel free to submit any poems anytime. We've got about 130 in the queue right now, but we'll get to everything. Sometimes we'll go quick, sometimes we'll take our time with things, depending on as the situation warrants. Let's see, who do we have in the crowd today? It's always a great group of people. Let's see, Amy Redacted is here. We got Janet McConaughey, Kimberly Gibson-Tran, Dr. Q, Lynn Schilling is here, Shape of Soup, PMB, CLAS, David Boos, Rose Leonard, all the way from across the pond. We got Maney here, Mary Lisa, D diminishes, I assume. Mark Grinier's here, Maney. Noah Droschik, good to see you. First time, long time, says Noah. Great to see you, Noah. Haley Ann is here. Maria L. Berg, John Victoria, Nancy Tunnell, Hamet Malik, Tom Barlow is here. He had a poem up recently. Sharon Ferrante is here. Ollie Rowland. Let's see. Katie Dozier, who's right over there. Jamie Thomas, Colin Sandberg's here. So the music stopped, and I'm still going through the names. That's great. Now, we're going to take a look first. Like, what we're going to do in most episodes is take a look at a regular, somebody who participates, because if you participate, you should get a little bonus, and you get to have your poems looked at sooner rather than later. Chelsea McGlynn is not here as often. I think she's not available during the Critique of the Week. Most days she's been here before, but she is almost always on the Rattlecast. And she sent a poem a few weeks ago for Poet Respond that came close, and I sent her an email like I do sometimes saying, this was one of the close poems this week. Sorry it didn't make the cut. But then she sent it back and turned it around and asked for more feedback on this poem in Critique of the Week. And so here it is. Now, Chelsea says, let's see, Chelsea, of course, is from Maryland. And she says the following about this poem. Tim, you gave me great feedback on this poem that I submitted for Poet Respond. I don't know if great is I think I'd give like a sentence or two. But thanks, Chelsea, for that. And I tried to fix it up based on that feedback. My questions are, which title works best? I really struggle with titles, so open to any and all suggestions. 2, does the science part make sense with sciencey poems? I worry that I'm relying too much on my own science background to fill in details, and if you don't have that background, the poem is unclear. And 3, do I overuse the word tongue? I played around with using other words, but there aren't really any synonyms for tongue. That's interesting, without getting too metaphorical and clouding the meaning. That's interesting, too. We were talking, Katie and I were talking to Ruth Reichel, for the upcoming food poems issue, and she made the point that there are very few, adjectives and words for taste. Like there's just, compared to other senses, there are just not a lot of taste-based things, and so there's no synonyms for tongue is really interesting too. So I don't exactly remember the article that this came about. I remember it was interesting, and it's sort of partially told in the poem. But let's take a look at this poem from Chelsea McGlynn once again. And this is based on a news story not too long ago. So here we go. This is God's Sorry, that's hard to say. God's Regurgitalite. That's a tough word to say. Or double tongue. And then there's an epigraph. So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you. Revelation 3:16. Oh, that's a great quote too. Oh, interesting. Okay, so here is the poem from Chelsea McGlynn. Even vomit fossilizes. An ancient fish retched up its meal of slimy sea star legs, forever preserving the stone the moment it spat the foul phlegm off of its tongue. But that tongue could be a different creature. The parasitic louse who, like his brothers, scale clingers and gill dwellers, lives under the cover of fish flesh, tender and young. With scissor-like pincers, he snips the tongue's vein, inducing decay, then wedges his body into the leftover stub, The fish still lives for a bit, though it's left with only crumbs, as its parasitic tongue eats for both of them. Do they ever quarrel over what to consume, or do their minds align when their flesh is fused? God, answer us with your wordless hum. When you chewed and spat us out, who was culpable? Whose tongue? So that's an interesting poem. It's God's regurgitalite. I don't know. I've never seen that word before. That's interesting. Or double tongue is the title. And first off, just about the title, because Chelsea asked about it. I would say, I've said this before, but if there's a word that's hard to pronounce, you should try to avoid it in poems. Even because if you don't know a word and you can sort of guess how it sounds, you just kind of cruise right by and then look it up later and you're all happy. But if you stumble over it, even reading it yourself, it makes it a little tricky. So that's a tough word I've never seen before. So I think double tongue to start with might be a little better. I don't think the epigraph was with the poem at the time. I think it's an interesting reference to that at the end. And so if I remember right, I think the ending was sort of similar before. So I think that's a good addition to that. Let me see what everybody's saying first of all before I talk more. Yeah. As Katie Dorter says, when in doubt between two titles, if close, I would always go with a more simple one. Yeah. Regurgitalite. Thanks, Janet. She pronounces it for me. Regurgitalite. Okay. So Jamie Thomas says, okay, I'm throwing my pen in garbage again. Dang, I love this. I'm not sure Regurgitalite is everyone's shot of whiskey, though. Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, double tongue is simple and intriguing. Yeah, I definitely go with double tongue. Yeah. So, and Tambarla says, I can see why she wants to introduce God at the beginning to set up the ending, but it doesn't quite work in the title. Yeah. Morgan Feeney says, I wonder if side swiping to a different title might help here, something to take the metaphor to the next level. And I might agree with that too. Janet McConaughey says, I like double tongue and the poem. Rachel Grieve says, as a geologist, I can guess what this means and like it, but otherwise maybe not. Okay. This is one of the things too, because I do like to read a lot of science. I'm always curious. I think maybe poets just in general are curious, but I like I like weird science and weird biological facts and stuff. And so I can even picture that parasite that replaces itself for the tongue in a fish, which is really gross, and then just eats inside the other fish's mouth, which is a really interesting parallel to, being sort of God's hands, that idea, that there's some kind of relationship there like that is a really fascinating thing to explore. So I think it's an interesting topic, which might be what I said before when reading this poem. Yeah. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, is there a way to introduce God via the notion of tongues in the title? Yeah. Oh, and Rose Leonard took the words out of her mouth because speaking in tongues is what Rose Leonard said. That was just what I was about to say. I wonder if there's some play on that could be the title. Anyway, let's take a closer look at the poem. Let's just get rid of the Regurgitalite, and let's do double tongue for now. Let's call it double tongue. Even vomit fossilizes. An ancient fish retched up its meal of slimy sea star legs, forever preserving and stone the moment it spat the foul phlegm off of its tongue. But the tongue could be a different creature. And so here we have a setup, and it's interesting. We never come back to this fossil. We use this as like a diving board into the other topic of the tongue, of that parasitic louse. And we never come back to and I wonder if the poem, because the ending feels like it doesn't, I don't know, I think the ending could be pushed farther and go, feel more round and complete. And I wonder if we could return somehow to this fossilized vomit that we open up with to make it a full frame around the poem. That was one of the things I thought the first time I read it. Let's keep going though. But the tongue could be a different creature, the parasitic louse who, like his brothers, scale clingers and gill dwellers, lives under the cover of fish flesh, tender and young. The tender and young, and those adjectives are pretty weak. And I wonder, I would like something more evocative here. That's a pretty, pretty flat as far as description goes. So I think there's a place to add something, a little better line. It's pretty weak. With scissor-like pincers, he snips the tongue's vein, inducing decay, then wedges his body into the leftover stub. I think it's a good description of what happens. The fish still lives for a bit. I wonder, a bit is a little vague. I wonder if we could Maybe that's another spot, sort of similar to tender and young. Though it's left with only crumbs, as its parasitic tongue eats for both of them. Do they ever quarrel over what to consume, or do their minds align when their flesh is fused? And in here I want to see, do you notice how the poem, it starts out this length, the lines, just on a basic like tape measure level. The lines are all this length, and we start to get pared down until they're really, really short. And it feels like the poem is sort of, it's moving too quickly at the end and doesn't have the same level of detail. And I think there's an opportunity to expand all of these things. And we aren't. We're kind of rushing to the ending, which I think makes the ending feel kind of rushed, and the poem could feel rich and more complete too if we did that. So, do they ever quarrel over what to consume, or do their minds align when their flesh is fused? Like, there's a whole opportunity right there. We could go into more detail and describe, use an example. Does this happen? Like, if we're going to set up the answer the question and answer, the open-ended question type format, you could ask a whole bunch of questions. And so why not push that a little farther and give some examples? Like, does this happen? Does this happen? Do they do this? You can push that and get some creative places there and make the poem a little more rich in the second half. God answer us with your wordless hum. When you chewed and spat us out, who was culpable? And again, another opportunity to expand and have some kind of surprising image or some kind of example there that makes this ending feel a little more rich. And so I think, it feels like there's sort of empty spaces. Like, imagine if the lines actually did go this long. Like, there's all this extra in here, and it feels like that's missing to me. And so I think we could add more detail in the second half of the poem to bring it more to life. Let's see. Yeah. And I think, just the topic, the way that's compared, I think, to God as a metaphor for the relationship with the divine, let's call it, there's a lot more to tease out and play with in the topic too. And so I think, if we started to use images and build this poem out in more detail, I think we'd get more of that metaphor, that extended metaphor, to become more vivid and have more weight to it. And so I think, this is one of those ones I'd want to push the poem farther and bring out that surprise by focusing on image and sort of let yourself wander and surprise yourself. Like, there's no leap in this poem where the poet says something. It feels like the poet said something that really surprised themselves. And so what you can do when that's not happening is play with the images, add more detail, and then let something surprising come out, and let yourself make that sort of subconscious connection. And I think that is a bit what's missing at the end. Sheba Soup says the constriction is probably intentional, could perhaps be pushed more evocatively as it shrinks. If that is intentional, it's not enough to make it feel like real constrictive. Like, if you were, building down, let's see the detail that would be there, but take our time and really, really push the poem, and maybe not use couplets. Make it really obvious that that's what's going on and that's intentional. But here it's sort of like, not strong enough. It's not obvious enough to be something that that the poet's doing. And so it's sort of in an ambiguous, muddled area in the middle to me. Yeah, Jamal Uden says, I'm going to skip dinner tonight. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I'd be interested to see more tongues as a tool for speech. A hum isn't really from the tongue, so I don't feel that counts. Yeah, there's a lot to go here. There's a lot we can do with this extended metaphor. And with, somebody mentioned speaking in tongues before. There's a whole thing where the Bible is, the word of God written by humans. And so it's a kind of translation too. And there are a whole bunch of things you can play with on that part. Like, what is, divine will versus, there's just so much. And so I think that can be explored a lot more. I think this can be a much more rich poem, and then, write more and then pare back what's not necessary. But I think there's just a lot more to play with. JB says, is humanity here the parasite on God's tongue in the metaphor? I think it's an interesting comparison, but I don't exactly understand the focus on culpability. Yeah, exactly. I just don't think that's fully explored. It's one of those things where it's an interesting idea, and I'm thinking as I read it, oh, that's really interesting, and I want a poet to expand on that. And I think the poem's not really expanding on it. It's proposing it and then letting it hang there. And I think we can really push deeper into it. And Lisa Seidenberg says, so what is God meant to be capable for? Exactly. Don't understand. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or the idea of the forked tongue, as Kimberly Gibson Tran says. There's just a lot to play with. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran too says, I'd be interested to see more tongues as a tool for speech. Oh, wait, I already read that. But yeah, I agree. Ali Rowland says, does the God here have a parasite in his or her tongue? Or do two people do the chewing? I'm confused. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I don't know if like the human, like, it's a interesting setup for metaphor, and it feels there's some ring of sort of a deeper meaning underneath it. But I'm not sure how to put it together. I don't know if the human is the parasite in this, or is the human thinking that is the fish thinking that there's not some kind of, parasitic thing pushing their, beliefs in what they. And you could even use not just God, but even, evolutionary drives and things like that. Like who's really steering this ship of my own life is a really, it's really interesting questions that this interesting bit of biology shows you. And so there's just a lot more places to go, I think. So I would love to see like that, a longer poem, and I don't know, come back to the vomit, the fossilized, the ancient fish. Because that's sort of left hanging there, and really a good opportunity to come back to it too. So a lot of possibility with this poem, and I think probably, I don't really remember what I said, but I think probably I said it was a really great setup and really interesting, but doesn't feel complete. That would be my guess, and it still feels not quite complete to me. Yeah. The Kimberly Gibson Tran puts it, the angle on God isn't quite clear, and it should be probed more. Yeah. Okay, so it's the general consensus, I think. Let me take a look back at the questions really quickly and see if we made sure we caught everything. So Chelsea said, that we talked about the title. Oh, the science part. I think that was pretty clear to me. Although it's tough for me too, because I did, like I said, know that story. But I think you described it pretty well. So I think pretty much understood what was going on in the fish and the tongue and the parasite on a biological, factual level. And then do I overuse the word tongue? I think no. I think the tongue was fine. You could use more tongue. We want different tongue. So, yeah. And Jamie Thomas says, despite its technical challenges, I really admire this piece and love the use of such muscular language. Yeah, me too. There's a lot to love in it. Just develop it some more. Okay. David S. says, is God the vomiter or the parasite? And yeah, I think maybe that's a way to bring that beginning back into the into the ending. Okay. Okay. And Mary Keating says, could make this a guzzle, which is an interesting concept too. Then we could bring back that. Oh, that's a nice way to play around with. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for sharing that, though, Chelsea. Hope that was helpful. Now let's go to, we're going to go to the oldest poems in the queue as fast as we can. I'm going to try to end right at the top of the hour. Me and Katie want to go out to a festival before it closes. So, and we'll go back to November 25th. The poet is The Sequence. Okay, the poet is The Sequence from, I believe it is India. Yeah, India. So here. General questions. My poems sound kind of exaggerated most of the time, and it feels like when I'm writing poetries on other people, it kind of gives the impression of either black or white. In other words, I get problem depicting someone gray personality, so I would really like to have some tips to improve those areas. Thank you. Okay. So here is this. This is To Capture. I only have the one poem. So we're talking about, So tips for making things a little more ambiguous and complicated, I guess, is what we're asking for here. Let's take a look. Let me shrink it a little big in the file here. There we go. Okay, To Capture. Riding on the bike and searching her place for her to be standing at the entrance gate, getting down the ride, walking towards her, and a pack of ice cream in my hand to capture her smile, under the flashing sight of the sky, stroking bushes and painting colors all out on the sheet for our canvases to capture the seed dispersals under the starry nights and the giant splashing out of the blue in the early morning lights. Once again, the stroking brushes and painting colors are laid out on the sheet for her to capture the flowers and primary colors on my forearm while her hands are holding mine. The four walls are standing with imprints of every part of her when the glasses are reflecting the florals and butterflies cherished in their fragment dries to capture us vibing together to the flying times, drawing of the moon, drowning into the ocean, necklace hanging onto a nail, and I am rolling straps of paper to make up beads for a bracelet with a spelling of her name. Riding the bike, I am parting ways with her, and our eyes are taking the final glance back for our hearts to capture the last glimpse of this golden hue shining in the flowing lake. Well, there's some interesting descriptions and details in this poem. I especially liked, where was it? I'm rolling straps of paper to make up beads for a bracelet with a spelling of her name. I think there's a nice intimacy and an unusualness to that description that I really liked a lot too. So to capture, riding on the bike and searching her place for her to be standing at the entrance gate. And so getting down the ride, walking towards her, and a pack of ice cream in my hand to capture her smile under the flashing sight of sky. I'm a little bit lost here. Riding on the bike, I think that the use of the present tense, the part, whatever it's called, the INGs, the ings, is making it a little bit like so the actions sort of drift in empty space. I'd like to see a little bit of description of where we are. We have the entrance gate, and I think if I'm riding on the bike, if we sort of get there, that would be helpful. Let's see. Amy Redacted says, I like this outlook on unique pure love. And Shape of Soup says effectively descriptive, a little tropey, but not too bad. And Janet McConaughey points out the moon drowning is good, I think. Yeah. Gerunds, that's the word I couldn't come up with. Thanks, gerunds. Yeah, a lot of gerunds. That was Chris Kaiser reminding me of that. That I should know. Okay. Yes, Desi Cochrane says the opening is a bit hard to parse, but then it sort of takes off. So I just like to know a little bit more of what's going on, and I feel a little bit lost. There's a pack of ice cream in my hand. How is that capturing her smile under the flashing sight of the sky, and how does the sky have sight? It feels like the poem didn't really get into itself yet, and I wonder if maybe it was just a ramp to warm up, and then you start flying later, so you can just cut it all off. The riding on the bike does repeat later, so maybe we don't even need it. Stroking brushes and painting colors all out on the sheet for our canvases to capture the seed dispersals under the starry nights and the giant splashing out of the blue in the early morning lights. So who's there's a lack of subject. Like, I don't know who's doing all this stuff. And I'm a little lost here. Heavy on the prepositions, says PMB. Not conjunctions, yeah. There's a nice rhythm here, for sure. There is, too, yeah. But I feel just a little bit like I'm swimming and I can't quite get a grasp of where we are or who's doing what, and I feel a little lost. Stroking brushes and painting colors all out on the sheet for our canvases to capture the seeds. So what is stroking brushes and painting colors? I guess the sunset's doing that, I guess. And so it's like painting light onto the town. I like that idea. But it would be so better if we just said it that directly. The sky is stroking the canvas of the street, painting colors on a sheet, capturing blah, blah, blah. I think if we just more directly saying that so we know that's going on, it would feel a little bit better. Let's see. Shape of Soup says needs a through line. Yeah. Once again, the stroking brushes and painting colors are laid out on the sheet for her to capture The flowers and primary colors on my forearm while her hands are holding mine. And so how is she capturing it? Just a little bit confused. The four walls are standing with imprints of every part of her. The florals and butterflies cherished in their fragmented dries. I'm not sure what fragmented dries means either. To capture us vibing together. The vibing is a bit, the register changes. Vibing is such a casual word in a modern, really, usage of that word. And it feels a little bit out of place with the rest of the poem, which feels a little more formal. So I think some word choice issues there. Drawings of the moon drowning into the ocean, necklace hanging onto a nail. And I am rolling straps of paper to make up beads for a bracelet with the spelling of her name. Riding the bike, I am parting ways with her, and our eyes are taking the final glance back. For our hearts to capture the last glimpse of this golden hue shining in the flowing lake. So it's really hard to, it's written in a way that makes it really hard because we don't get the subject to piece together what I think it was Shape of Soup said, that a through line. I think what's happening is just he's picking up, somebody loves for a date, and the sunlight is beautiful. He sees her by the gate. They ride off on their bike together, and she looks back at the beautiful sunset on the landscape. Is that right? And then there's the whole seed thing. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, we need more context for the parting. 2, is this a final parting or just goodbye for now? It matters. Yeah, I just, again, there's some nice emotion. There's nice vibing. It's a poem that has a vibe. and I enjoy that. And there's some nice, nice descriptions and nice acts of noticing the world, which I appreciate. As David Booth says, seems like the poet is trying to capture an experience, maybe a haibun, clear description of the event, and then a haiku to capture the magic. Amy says, God, not the haibun again. But yeah, it could be compressed though into a much shorter, like that. If that's the point of the poem, it could be compressed into a very, very short poem. First of all, I think that would help. But we get, we get those strokes, no pun intended, but that's sort of all we get. And, Danetta Burmia says there seems to be too much going on. Paring this down to a concentrated idea might work better. Yeah, and that's what. So we have a lot of repetition. If we could really just get that, I'm trying to think if there's a poem that's a good example of that. But what could we? I don't know, because it has like the feeling of that moment, but sort of nothing happened except for we're conveying the feeling of that moment. And is that enough? If you were to cut it down to just conveying the feeling of that moment, would that be enough? Sharon Fuentes says tanka. Tanka is actually a great form. I think it's about tanka length in how much we get. But is there, this goes back to the point, like what is the purpose of poetry? And is there a problem here that we're trying to understand? Is there something that I'm going to learn from the process of reading this poem and writing this poem? And I'm not quite sure. So in other words, another way to say it is it needs a turn. Like nothing actually happens. If we look at the last poem we looked at by Chelsea McGlynn, a bunch of different things happen. Like we were going in one direction, then, we're going in this direction, talking about God instead. We were talking about this fossil, but no, we're talking about the tongue that made me think of that. And so there's a sense that we're moving somewhere and finding some deeper meaning behind it. And I think that that's not doing it. So I think in addition to compressing it, I think, really thinking, you have to think about why you were compelled to write the poem. What is the purpose? What does it do? And the purpose of the poem is to make some kind of transformation. So how can you think about this in a different way? Like, why would you think about this in a different way at the beginning of the poem than at the end? And I think that's one of the things that's really missing too. So really nice images, some nice lines, but it needs to be condensed and it needs to figure out why it exists. And that's the way to get there. Yeah, as Mary Keating says, it's a pretty scene, but needs something deeper for us to say, yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's move on to the next poem, but thanks for sharing that. Once again, that poet was The Sequence. Okay, next up in line, we'll move to November 26th, the next day, and this was from Emilia Cappuccino from Roma, Texas. And looks like, can these be improved? This general question is, can these be improved? How? What is the difference between these poems and the ones that get published? That's a good question. Okay, we will take a look. The first one, so we have two relatively short because they're skinny poems. Lord, I Can't Go On This Way is the first poem. Let's take a look. Lord, I Can't Go On This Way. And there's an epigraph from Gloria Anzaldúa. The U.S.-Mexican border es una herida abierta where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. Oh, that's a great quote. Lord, I can't go on this way. Socks wet, pants soaking, mud weighs me down. I have watched the sun rise and set on my dreams. I was born at night in a home where no one believes in the warmth of the sun. So I leave, my mother sobbing at the front door like the ghost of my father, like the ghost of his father. My feet are blistered, my legs are tired. I am stuck in this mud, waiting in limbo as they build more fences in front of my eyes. When I close them, I can hear my mother praying, weeping feet that leave a weeping family in their wake. I wonder if years from now, just like the dinosaurs, they will find the echoes of my footprints on shorelines. Yeah, well, this one's interesting. I think it's a really great topic for it. And, and I think, it's a great use of the quote. The epigraph is really wonderful. And then it's an interesting title, too. It starts out really nicely in imagery. Rosenars has loved this. I like a lot about it. And so, yeah. Mary Lisa says, I was born at night, but that's just me. PMB says, does this poem need punctuation? I don't think so. Yeah. Shebasu says, effective brevity. Katie Dozier says, there are some nice images here, but too much telling instead of showing, and a lack of movement. Feels like stuck in the mud itself, unfortunately. Yeah, I think that's the downside of it. Hamid Malik says, lovely parts. Okay. Okay, so let's read the poem a little more slowly and look at it in more detail. This is a good one. Lord, I can't go on this way. Socks wet, pants soaking, mud weighs me down. I've watched the sun rise and set on my dreams. I think that's a very nice opening. We get a lot of, the short, fragmented sentences. It's a lot of visceral image. We can feel that. We're set in a place. The abstraction of I have watched the sun rise and set on my dreams is well grounded. It's anchored to that. Do you see how that it's anchored to those images? So because we had that concrete thing, we have that concrete image there, we get to go off and be abstract because we have a tether to that. So we don't feel lost, even though, it's an abstraction. And so I think it's a great setup. And I like the short lines and the three line stanzas. I was born at night in a home where no one believes in this warmth of the sun. And so in this part, this is the first. So I think this really strong opening. No one believes in the warmth of the sun is sort of a repeat of the instead of my dreams type abstraction. And I think a less effective one, because at least I have watched the sun rise and set. You don't expect it to be on my dreams. And so there's a surprising turn to that. It works like, a cut in a haiku or the last couplet in a sonnet or something like that. But then I was born at night in a home where no one believes in the warmth of the sun. Just makes me wonder, how is that literally true? Is there a level that's true on, and how so? Katie Dozier says, I'd like more intimate details here to make us feel more with a narrator. A good poem to reference would be Nikki Finney's Rosa Parks poem. And so that's the thing. So we have this, when we have socks wet, pants soaking, mud weighs me down, we're like in the river there, we're in the mud. And then we go to this, no one believes in the warmth of the sun. I don't know what to attach. It doesn't feel visceral at all. It's this abstraction that I just wonder how accurate that is. And it doesn't really feel compelling in the way the beginning did. And so instead of going into this abstraction, like how could we express this in a way that's as concrete as the socks wet and the mud weighing me down? PMB, I think it came by fast, said maybe remove the warm sun. I was born at night in a home where no one believes, and just leave it like that. Oh, that was Desi Cochran, sorry. Yeah. I leave my mother sobbing at the front door. Or so I leave my mother sobbing at the front door, like the ghost of my father, like the ghost of his father. I think that's nice. My feet are blistered. My legs are tired. And so those are sort of, easy expressions and that don't have a lot of, vivid detail. And I think that are not quite cliche, but it's sort of, it's just generalized. I think we could get more specific with the actual details of it. The great poems have a few very specific, well-placed details. Just do so much work, and when you have the more abstract, it's not as strong. I'm stuck in this mud, and again, that is a cliche, stuck in the mud, and it's also repeating the mud up here without really expanding on it. And so, so this is where the poem is sort of, spinning its wheels. I think, as Katie Dozier said. I am stuck in the mud, waiting in limbo as they build more fences in front of my eyes. I like the building more fences in front of my eyes. How can you explain that more? Like, what does it look like when the people build fences? Like literally, what are you seeing at that moment? It's similar to what we were talking about Chelsea McGlynn's poem. There were these places where you could expand and go into a little more detail and let's bring the thing to life. And I think that's missing there. When I close them, I think I can hear my mother praying. So again, that's a nice line. If there was enough concrete stuff around it, that'd be a great sort of phase shift into the more expansive type line. Here, it's not quite as grounded and needs just more work around it to make it work, I think. Weeping feet that leave a weeping family in their wake. And now we're just sort of repeating ourselves. And we've sort of said the same type thing several times now. I wonder if years from now, just like the dinosaurs, they will fill the echoes of my footprints or find the echoes of my footprints on the shorelines. And I think that's a great ending. And so what we have here really is we have an interesting title, great epigraph, really good, strong beginning, and a really good ending. And in the middle, we kind of just didn't really add a whole lot. And what we need are details in that middle section to bring the rest of the poem to life and make it all feel complete and click together. So missing that specificity, some surprising ways to describe things, and cutting it down to the point where it comes through that section faster too. So we don't feel like we spend a lot of time going nowhere. Okay. Yeah. PMB suggests no one believes the sun rises. Rises better invoke the idea of hope, where the warmth evokes love. That's a good point too. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's my opinion about this one. Amy Redacted says, I was born in a home where no one liked the sun. No one was ready for change away from economic disparity. I feel a kinship to this poem as a South African. Now, that's interesting. That's something to bring out with more vivid details. So that we can all understand it. Mark Greener suggests, too, the ghost lines should be replaced with more telling details. I think the fences image works given Trump immigration policy. Mary Keating says the poet could play with the pull to stay home but want to, and the push from the fences where the speaker wants to go but can't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but the ending, as Rachel Grief says, the ending with the dinosaurs is great. Yeah, I really like that. That's really, really good. So here we have a poem that we could really, without too much effort, make it a great poem. And I think that's the difference. You asked what's the difference between the poems that get published and the ones that don't. I think the topic is really interesting. The emotional core is there. There's a good beginning and a good ending. It's just not quite tied together. It's saggy in the middle, as someone said. And if we could, then we make the whole experience be really memorable. And that's really the point. Every word should be adding to this experience that we have of the poem. And it's not quite there, but it's really close. Now let's take a look at the other one. Another border poem. Another border poem. And again, this poet, I should say again. The poet is Emilia Cappuccino. Another border poem for another dead body that floats bloated in the Rio Grande. Another border poem for another child a long way from home, never to return again. Another border poem for another foot of border fence that separates people from their home and compassion from a man. I wonder when we will tire of another border poem and all the vowels that fall flat and all the consonants that ring hollow. I wonder how long until the words of this poem fall off the page and into the empty hands of someone from a foreign land, so finally, they may fill their bodies with bread and cover their bodies with warmth. Yeah. So, I like the structure of this one too. I think this has a lot of the same qualities, positive qualities, and the same issues as the last poem, where it sort of gets a little bit. There's a really nice setup. There's a good structure to the poem. It's an important topic where you can feel a lot of emotion behind it. In parts, there's really good concrete details where it's really connective. But then other parts, it gets a little bit muddled with abstraction and loses the spark of energy that it has. And so I think, again, both these poems are sort of, which is why it's fun to look at two poems, because you can really see what's going on. And I think it's condensing and looking, keeping an eye out for what, we say another border poem. But we don't want to have actual details that are dull because we're talking about dull repetition of the same poems. We want to have each image be really interesting. So look at the first one. For another dead body that floats bloated in the Rio Grande. Now that, the detail there, the amount, even though it's a short, just 3 lines, you really see that dead body that floats bloated in the Rio Grande. But the next one, another poem for another child a long way from home, never to return again. I mean, the difference between seeing that image of the dead body floating versus the abstraction of a child a long way from home, never to return, like there's no image you can convey of that. It's like an absence that you're showing, not the child who's lost somewhere. There's not that like detail. Let's see. So anyway, another border poem for another foot of border fence that separates. And so the foot of border fence, another good specific detail, we get to see that, but then separates the people from their home and compassion from a man. Like that abstraction just makes the poem have less power to it. Let's see. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Trent says, the challenge, I think, with a poem structured around a repetition is that you have to be clever with new variations and images, really work the tissue that isn't repeated. Yeah, exactly. And so having more detail, and similar to, with the last poem, where it just got bogged down with the generalities and felt like it was spinning its wheels. This is the places that it does. I wonder when we will tire of another border poem. And I like this part. So it's good here, good, it's stronger here, a little dull there, a little stronger, but then goes dull again. And this is a really strong part though. I wonder when, and I would cut this, I wonder when we will tire, and just say another border poem. But I love this run here. Another border poem when all the vowels that fall flat and the consonants that ring hollow. So going to that part, but there's detail to the abstraction. You see the difference in that? And that makes it stay alive. I wonder how long until the words of this poem fall off the page and into the empty hands. And if we're going to show empty hands, let's actually see the empty hands. Describe them a little bit, just a little bit of detail. It makes this stuff come to life, and that's what we're missing. Hands of someone from a foreign land, so finally, they may fill their bellies with bread and cover their bodies with warmth. And I think that the payoff it works if we had enough vivid imagery, but it's not enough, not sounding, not being surrounded by enough concrete image and stuff. So again, great concept for a poem, good structure, where the details are singing the poem is really working, and whether becoming vague, it's not. And that's the difference between the poems that are published and the poems that aren't. Because really, when we're writing a poem, the whole point is to make this string of language that's really memorable. And we have to work with the way that the human brain works and the way things stick with us. And they stick with us when we have these concrete images, when we have a clarity of who's doing what. I mean, that's why we talk about these things. And if you follow the way brains work for poems to be memorable. They stick with you and they have a lot of impact. And what we're trying to do is make poems that have impact. And so including a lot of details is what would really work. So more details. Okay, that's going to move on to the next poem. We probably got time for one more. And again, let's see, that was Emilia Cappuccino from Texas. The next poet in line is Jewel Herman from Wisconsin. And it looks like 2 poems here. 2 pretty short poems. I think we'll have time for them. No general questions, just do yearning and approach. Okay. Yearning, we'll go with that first. Yearning. Outdoor cleaning done, not much meaning, gathered from seemingly meaningless task, light streaming out of large windows, through porch banisters, casting shadows on the driveway. From where the light comes, my family stands, but I glance up. Amongst the dark clouds, a sharp moon, branches obstructing it. So I walk, gravel felt through my shoes, wind at my back. Still the trees obstruct the young moon. Big shed behind, much compacted dead grass inside, but still the sliver of light is obscured by twisted, desolate branches. From the gravel to grass, I went, straining to see. Trees give way to black clouds drifting over the moon. Come all this way for clouds to have their say. Okay, so for this one, we have a very fragmented, listy kind of feel, which I tend to, the general advice, which, all advice doesn't always apply, but if it in general, it generally does. And here I was going to say that, writing like you talk is so important, and having this sort of fragmentary mode of speech makes it, makes it feel like not natural and makes it feel more difficult to connect with. But I actually kind of like the way it moves in and out of fragment, and I think that's actually a nice aspect of it. Rachel Grieve says the poem is more interesting than the title. Mary Keating says the ending is weak. Emily Arnold Fernandez says something about the way of speaking sounds false to me and makes the poem harder to get into. And part of that is amongst. This is PMB. Amongst is never necessary. Among, just among. Shape of Soup says introduction is too much telling. The rest has evocative promise. So there's some promise in this poem and some place need help. So Yearning is just a pretty weak title. It doesn't really add much to it. It's sort of like a label you slap on. Outdoor cleaning done, not much meaning, gathered from seemingly meaningless task. Because we don't have the articles, we don't have the and a and stuff. That's one of the things that makes it ring untrue, as, of course, don't make me pull up the Rena Espaillat. It's the articles that make what we say ring true. That's a quote from that poem, and it's just true. And so dropping those and having it be fragmentary and like that makes the poem feel inauthentic. And one of the things we're chasing, we want people to remember our stories. We want them to stick with us and shape the way we think. And but the other thing we want to do is feel authentic to do that. Authenticity is such in short supply these days, and having poems that feel like they're not authentic makes it not work as well and not connect as much. And so not having the and a and articles like that, and not having natural speech makes the poem feel less authentic. Light streaming out of large windows, through porch banisters, casting shadows on the drive. And again, we have all the gerunds too. We were cleaning, not much meaning, seemingly, streaming, casting shadows. But the light streams out of large windows, through porch banisters, casting shadows on the driveway. Like just saying it directly like that in a simple way, just changing the syntax a little bit, it makes it just more natural and less artificial feeling. So just say it like that. The light streams out of the large windows, From where the light comes, my family stands, but I glance up. Among amongst the dark clouds, a sharp moon. I like the turn there. This is one of my favorite parts in the poem. Amongst the dark clouds, a sharp moon, which is something that appeared, but it was kind of surprising to me. Branches obstructing it. So I walk, gravel felt through my shoes, wind at my back. I keep saying wind. Still, the trees obstruct the young moon, the big shed behind, much compacted dead grass inside. Still, the sliver of light is obscured by twisted, desolate branches. And so for some reason, we're trying to, move so we can see the moon. But it's told in a way that's not very direct. Again, it's an interesting thing that's going on, but we're not being very direct about the telling of it. From gravel to grass, I went, straining to see trees give way to black clouds drifting over the moon, come all this way for clouds to have their say. And the idea behind that the light found, it's something that I've never actually, that I can think of, seen in a poem. It's an interesting idea that the light has to travel so far just to be blocked by a cloud at the very last instant, and how that, personifying that light might feel. So it's an interesting place to go and end up with the poem. It's just told in a way that's sort of abstract and unnatural. Tell the story directly, condense it. This poem doesn't have to be that long either, to have that be told. So let me see if there's any other comments to pass along. Yeah, a bit repetitive, says Haley Ann. Rosenard points out, does the dead grass add anything? Amy Redacted says, Timothy, can I ask a question? Well, of course. I mean, who's stopping you? But you just did, so you're out of questions for the day. No, I'm just kidding. You can ask another question. From where the light comes, my family stands. Sorry, this is Emily Arnold Fernandez. From where the light comes, my family stands. I found that line intriguing, but I don't fully understand it. Yeah, I think one of the things, I think this is probably a poet that's sort of early on in the writing career. And what you have to do is have an awareness of what lines are interesting, what's sort of surprising like that. I found that line intriguing. Like, which lines are intriguing and which lines are not intriguing? Cut the ones that are not and push farther into the ones that are. And that's really how writing works. Like, that's really, if you had like one rule, like when I don't really know how to play chess, but I try to control the center squares, And if you follow that one rule, you can sort of get by. And if you follow the rule of paying attention to what's intriguing, deleting what's not, and pushing further into what's intriguing to you, then you'll write interesting poems. That's really the bottom line. So it's a good strategy, is one sort of basic model of how to function. Okay, let's do the other poem. And the other poem is this, Approach. And again, we have a very abstract, short title that doesn't add a whole lot. Oh, no, wait, we don't, because it was a little bit more. But it's still Song About Life. It's not Approach. Oh, no, I clicked the wrong button. Hang on, that's going to be next week's. Oops, bear with me. I clicked the wrong. There's two options to move forward in Submittable. And I clicked the wrong. This is the second poem. It is Approach. Okay, here we go. Approach. I look internally for that around, finding it not found. I went down other paths, telling tales set in the future, and past and ones about Maine cats, traveling down a trail on bike with ball. I learned to look externally and write poem about scenes not fashioned by my limited mind, but I was scared to let my feelings seep onto the page. I gotta shrink. More shrinking. Okay, there we go. I didn't want my internal thoughts spelled out for the others to see, but I found holding them in held my expression back, so I trickled them in. Some I poured my all with no nature at all, perceiving the beauty around, and writing it down made me see more within me. So write, looking out and internally. Well, that's interesting. I think it's good advice for poetry. But as Rachel Greaves says, articles, please. And let's actually yeah. Let's pull up this poem. This is the Rena Espaillat poem that we bring up about once a month. But this is the advice. It's a sonnet of hers, work in progress. He showed me some and asked for my advice. I pointed out a line that wouldn't scan, a pair of rhymes that cried for divorce, and commented, but briefly, on the quotes in foreign alphabets, unglossed. Of course, he said, and nodded, and took notes, as if okay with all of it. And then I added, put back every thee and an and a. It's almost nothing what they do, but the articles make what they say ring true. You never know what buttons not to touch, which almost nothing is going to prove too much. This morning he submitted work again, but brusque, defensive, with a hint of spice. Only fool goes for a walk in minefield twice. Next time I'll tell him poem is very nice. So, really wonderful demonstration of that. But yeah, put back every thee and an and a. It's almost nothing what they do, but articles make what they say ring true. And that's just so true. So great advice from Rena, one of the best formal poets ever. Anyway. And so we every time we drop articles, we don't want to drop articles. A lot of the same stuff applies to the last poem. Again, it's a good idea. And I agree with the lesson that we do want to look internally, but then, you find the internal through the external, and so looking out and internally, and that's how you write. So I agree with that. Let's maybe read it really quickly one more time. Approach. I look internally for that around, finding it not found. I went down other paths, telling tales set in the future and past, and ones about Maine cats, traveling down a trail on bike with ball. See, that's this thing, traveling down a trail on bike with ball that's made to fit this sort of shape of the poem, too. We want to do that. We want to write like we talk, use natural speech, but the scenes not fashioned by my limited mind. But I was scared to let my feelings seep onto the page. I didn't want my internal thoughts spelled out for others to see. And that's really... So often we're trying to hide in our poems. Like, you want to express yourself. That's why we're writing. And then yet we hide, and we don't want to hide. But there's nothing wrong with writing poems about Maine cats. I think that's interesting. And the trick is to get to the revealing about yourself, what's surprising about your own thoughts and beliefs and perspectives, even if it's through the lens of a Maine cat. And so that's really the trick of it all, too. I didn't want my internal thoughts spelled out for others to see, but I found holding them in held my expression back, so I trickled them in. Some I poured my all, with no nature at all, perceiving the beauty around, and, writing it down, made me see more within me. So write, looking out, and internally. Yeah, and we get a nice little rhyme there too. So it's I love the fact that the poet is having fun playing with language, messing around with a shape like this, playing with some rhyme at the end, thinking about writing. I think it's a great start. We just want more natural speech, it's always more details. Be direct, like do what you're suggesting here should be done, and be direct with what you're telling us about your poems too. So yeah. Mary King says he could have had an image of a cat playing with a yarn ball instead of a trail on bike with ball. Yeah. PAB says this talk of keeping articles is challenging. Does this apply only to narrative poems or all poems? Pretty much all poems. I mean, it's possible to write poems. There are exceptions to every rule. But for the most part, 99% of the time, maybe 98% of the time, 99, you want the poem to be, a poem is an oral, it's the music of speech, and articles are a part of speech. They're a really fundamental part of speech. They're so fundamental that they're actually generated in the Broca's area of your brain, which you can't even consciously control. And so when you're withholding them, there's like these big missing gaps in the way things work. Those, read James Pennebaker's book, The Secret Life of Pronouns. Is that the title of it? But the function words, the words that connect the tissue of the sentence together are really crucial. It doesn't matter what kind of poem you're writing. So yes, keeping those articles in, making it like natural speech. There's certain really experimental, like language poets, people that are, I wouldn't say Gertrude Stein, you need to add all your articles. And, if you're doing some kind of things with lists, I mean, there's certain exceptions when you're actually playing with a lack of articles, when you're doing, visual poetry or some kind of concrete poetry that's not that's not voice-based, that's not oral, but mostly poems are oral. This is the oral tradition put onto a page as sheet music so we can all see and read along by picking up a book. And yeah, you want to keep the articles there. Yeah. Yeah. And Amy Redacted said, if I put a poem entitled 100701 OEF this week under the pen name Amy de Villiers, could you look out for it perchance? If you put, if you help me see it, I mean, I can't guarantee next week I'm going to remember and see that was you. And actually, I think this is the first, maybe second week that you've been here, Amy, but I will keep an eye out, and that's what I kind of do. So if I get to know your name, and if you have CLAS or Shape of Soup, I kind of forget who's who. So if you could put in the subject line, this is Amy Redacted, or this is Shape of Soup, or this is CLAS, or Dry Amontillado, the people have handles instead of full names, I might not notice that you're someone who participates all the time, so that would help. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks, everybody, for sharing those poems, everybody who participated, and hope you had fun and learned a lot. I always do just by rambling. It's always fun for me, so thanks for being here. Now, this week coming up on the Rattlecast, let's see who we've got. The guest is going to be Partridge Boswell. No, that's wrong. That was last week's guest. Last week was Partridge. He was a musician. He was really fun to talk to. This week's poet is Susan Brown. And it's going to be Susan Brown's second appearance. She appeared way back in episode 14 or something. But she has a new book called Monster Mash. It's really beautiful from Four Way Books. We're going to be talking about that. She also has done a whole bunch of classes on humor and poetry. We're talking about that, one of my favorite topics, because it's pretty rare. So it should be a fun subject to talk about. Some 250 episodes after her first appearance. I should also mention the Poetry Space just dropped. Me and Katie Dozier just did that an hour ago. That was, we were looking at another poetry duel, comparing poems at random from Emily Dickinson and Margaret Atwood, who won the poetry duel. Find out if you go to the Poetry Space, type that in to anywhere you get your podcasts. And then the prompt for this week, I should say, Katie's prompt is, let me pull it up. I got to find somewhere. This would be a good reminder, too. As you might know, me and Katie are doing a crown of Hyben. So I'm trying to make my Hyben this month one of a match so I can just read instead of write a whole new poem, because time is always sparse. Let's see. Write a poem in which someone makes a mistake that leaves an impression. Okay, I wonder if I did that yet or not. That's write a poem in which someone makes a mistake that leaves an impression. That's your prompt for this week. Your guest, once again, Susan Brown, Rattlecast 289, Sunday, April 13th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.